So I guess the question for this forum now is, what are the next steps we need to take? And I'm sure most of you have asked a similar question: where do we begin? Well, we don't have all the answers. We are going to start this discussions today with insights from organisations with deep roots in managing our waste streams over decades, collecting and treating waste, designing up waste in packaging, leading consumers to behavioural changes. And we're going to hear how these organisations must navigate urgent and real changes to their business models as they look to not just burn and bury waste, but to fundamentally rethink its value. We're also going to discuss the role of the consumer, you and I. How can we use our purchasing power to eliminate carbon and waste? And what are the standards and services do we need to support our shift in consumer behaviour? And we'll also hear from the Australian Government's Department of Agriculture, Water and Environment to discuss its seed programs and the government's role in public awareness raising. Welcome to our amazing panel. We have Suzanne Toombara, from CEO Accor. We have Brooke Donnelly, CEO APCO. Nicole Garifano, Head of Circular Economy Development at Planet Arc. Kate McMullen is Principal Director, Resource Circularity and Communications, Environment Protection Division at the Department of Agriculture, Water and Environment. And Connie Ho is Strategic Initiatives Manager at Standards Australia. So I want to ask you all, where do we start in the circular economy transition? Do we need national targets of, say, 100% circularity by 2030? Some European countries are doing that. We know Finland's target is 100% circularity by 2025. Or do we need consistent and higher landfill levies, for example, across the country? Do we need design standards and enhanced manufacturing capability? So, or what project or country can we emulate to learn from? So, Suzanne, I'm going to throw to you at Accor to give us your reflections on this. If you can come back to us in a couple of minutes with an answer, that would be great.
Lisa, thank you. And also, Tommy, great to hear all of those concepts really well summarised. I think we need all of those things, Lisa. This is systemic change that we need to deliver, and we need every lever to be activated in order to deliver that systemic change. Traditionally, we've approached circular economy from the waste concept, as in waste reduction and managing waste. What we need to think about is circular economy from a value add, a resource efficiency context, which also then delivers so many more benefits, social, environmental, economic as well, and one that makes sure that we can sustain the way that we live, hopefully indefinitely. So in terms of how we ensure that circular economy, I think everyone on this panel is really well positioned to take us through that. I'd like to reiterate Tommy's perspective. Recycling is a part of the circular economy. It's a part that comes after so many other parts. And whilst Brooke and others can take us through how we need to make sure that at that design and manufacture stage, we have to ensure that we start with the end in mind. When we do finally arrive at the stage where we are disposing of or considering repair, reuse and recycling, there are really important things we can do too. So, for example, you asked what the consumer can do. Apart from making those choices at the beginning of life and, when they're at the shelf, about ensuring that they engage more constructively with circular outcomes, choosing recycled, choosing domestically produced, and making sure that whatever they do choose has a proper end of life outcome as well, in terms of repairability, reusability and recyclability. Even decisions they make, for example, at the bin, are really important. Taking the time to ensure that you recycle right. I guess the saying goes, rubbish in, rubbish out. From a recycling perspective, if you put rubbish in the recycling bin, you're not going to be able to recycle it. And so making sure that our journey as consumers as well along the way is engaged with that concept of circularity and engaging with circular outcomes. I might leave it at that because I think there's more to unpick as the other panelists evolve their thoughts too. But hopefully that can help.
Thanks, Suzanne. Rubbish in, rubbish out. Brooke, what do you think? You've been working at the forefront for packaging design now before a lot of people. What's your reflections on where to start?
Well, I think, you know, Suzanne's got it largely right. It isn't actually, I would love to be able to say, hey, let's just do this one thing. If we all get that right, we've got this done. That is very far removed from the reality of the circular economy. The circular economy is about systems design thinking and the need to address and create solutions that come from a circular economic perspective. Now, that circular economic perspective is going to require you to, as Suzanne said, it's not just about recycling or reuse or repair, it's about the whole life cycle of a product. And that means as individuals, regardless of what part of the supply chain or what sector we're involved with, we all need to fundamentally rethink how we engage with products, be it packaging, be it textiles, e-waste, whatever it is. We are all consumers and we consume in a way currently that is very linear, and that linear consumption actually drives really ineffective environmental outcomes. And so it's about how do we actually deliver on products in such a way that it enables consumers to engage in them with the best environmental or the minimizing that environmental impact. And so it really is a combination of redesign, how you interact with the products. And it's also really important that collaboration across the supply chain. You can't design for something to be recycled if you don't understand the capabilities, constraints of the recycling sector and how it operates. So this is where this kind of traditional siloed kind of approach of us and them absolutely fundamentally is a great big barrier in the system and something that needs to be addressed. And this is where, you know, important supply chain collaborations and bringing industry and science together as well. You know, there are some things that are, you know, what you might commonly refer to as low-hanging fruit and you know, things that we can quite easily deal with, but there's some really complex issues here and some really technical solutions that are required to as well. So it's really about bringing industry, science, government, consumers together. And I think, you know, touching on again consumers, I think it's a really important element because we need to make sure that we empower consumers to make informed choices. This isn't about, you know, whose responsibility is, but it's about empowering and ensuring that consumers feel that they can make a difference. And I always fundamentally say, vote at that register, you know, understand your impact, understand if something's recycled, understand if it's got recycled content in it, and support the businesses that are making the right circular economic choices. So I think consumers have a big role to play in that. And I think understanding the impact, and that's been one of the benefits of COVID, people having the time to kind of take a step back and go, wait a second, I'm operating in this way, and is that contributing or is it diminishing the value that I can as an individual add? So I think that's a really important part of it, but a lot to be done and lots of people doing lots of good work, and it's really positive to see it all coming together and coming to fruition now. So I'll hand back to you, Lisa, and to the next panelist.
Thanks, Brooke. So it's consumers, what can they do? How can they be informed? Connie from Standards Australia, what role does Standards have here in terms of helping consumers, but also producers?
Thanks, Lisa. It's a real privilege to be part of this panel and to talk about standards in the circular economy. And for those of you who are not familiar, a standard is a document developed by consensus. It sets out specifications to ensure that products, services and systems are safe, reliable and consistently perform the way they were intended to. And standards ensure compatibility, they increase product safety and quality and enhance market uptake. And at Standards Australia, the standards are developed by expert committees via a trusted, consensus-based, transparent process. So where would we start with circular economy? There's 4 key areas. I think firstly, developing the common language around the building blocks of circular economy, around principles, frameworks, measures and product data. Secondly, developing guidance on circular design. And Thirdly, areas where circular economy can have the greatest impact. So Professor Tommy outlined those key sectors that contribute to the global emissions. We should focus on those areas first. And finally, on Brooke's point, focusing on consumer education to really change behaviour and empower consumers. So I'm just going to delve into these into a bit more detail. In terms of the building blocks of common language around circular economy principles and frameworks, we've already started work at the International Standards Organisation with their Technical Committee 323 on this. And recently we've facilitated a new Australian Committee of Circular Economy experts to contribute Australia's voice to this international work. Secondly, in terms of guidance on circular design, so up to 80% of a product's environmental impacts are determined at the design and development phase. And the International Electrotechnical Commission has already published standards for electric and electronic products, which we could build upon for the Australian context. So these are things like standards on material efficiency, end of life and recyclability rates, and reliability of products containing reused parts, as well as refurbishment practices. Thirdly, the areas where circular strategies can have the greatest impact. The Circularity Gap Report identified housing, mobility and nutrition as being responsible for almost 70% of global emissions. Standards Australia's Circular Economy Advisory Group, a number of members who are on the panel today, are helping us to identify and validate these priority areas for the Australian economy. We're also working with the CSIRO to map out standards around plastics, and we've identified that design and reuse are sort of key areas where standards are needed. We're also working with the state and territory EPAs to explore a possible reuse standard and to also complement single-use plastic bans. And finally, focusing on consumer education, which I think is a driver to behavioural change. To that end, we can actually learn from what has worked in the past. The water efficiency labelling scheme, which is that 5-star rating scheme that you see on washing machines and dishwashers and other water use devices, references Australian standards. So since 2005, when this scheme was launched, it saved 150,000 megalitres, or equivalent of 60,000 Olympic-sized pools worth of water. So in the not too distant future, we can probably see a need for a resource efficiency label, which could empower consumers and enable them to make informed choices about a product's environmental impact. So such a label would require strong standards to specify what exactly would be required to achieve the rating. And then finally, to echo Suzanne and Brooke's point, this is a collaborative effort, and we should all work together to really amplify our collective impact. Thanks.
Thanks, Connie. Some great insights there, and the thinking around a resource efficiency label. Nicole, you're at the Australian Circular Economy Hub, Planet Ark. What are your reflections on this? Where do we start? And just reflecting on what Connie had to say.
Yeah, I think, Lisa, one of the things that we need to recognise is that we've actually already started. I think that there's a little bit of a misnomer that the circular economy is a brand new something that sits in a brand new box. We've got to learn a whole suite of brand new ways of doing and being in the economy. And certainly there are some new ways, but as Professor Weidman explained in his presentation, there's actually quite a number of good examples of how we can move forward with this circular economy approach. It just needs to be an all of system wide, embracing of a circular economy. So, one of the things that we've talked about here is around consumers. And I think we need to also consider that there's a wide girth of types of consumers, particularly when it comes to dollar value and by volume. The largest consumer in Australia are actually all 3 levels of government. So there's a really important conversation to have around procurement when it comes to government and also large organisations as well. But we also need to get those broad consumers, governments, and also individual consumers comfortable with the concepts of sharing and repairing goods, and also to make it more attractive for consumers to adopt a repair attitude. we maintain our cars very well. Most people do, I guess. So we need to find ways of being able to, shift that maintenance and repair attitude with consumers to a wider range of products. We're looking at product as a service, for example, as one of the 5 business models that are promoted by Accenture and OECD and others. One simple example of product as a service is taking the product of what would have been CDs and DVDs into a streaming service. So we no longer buy the product, the product is the music or it's the video. So we're actually buying the service. Another example of that is ink cartridges, with a new service that's been launched by HP, or leasing of photocopiers. We've been doing that for years. Sharing platforms, as Tommy mentioned, car sharing networks like GoGet. This is actually a circular economy business model. So we need to recognise, I think, what we're already doing, and certainly we need to expand that and make it a formalised all of economy transition. And I guess the way for me that I'm seeing of ways to do that is, looking at Europe. The European Circular Economy Action Plan, that was launched in 2015, and here we are 7 years later. We've got lots of great examples there to adopt. In 2015, they have 54 actions identified, and they've all been adopted and are already they're already adopted or they've been completed. But they really centred on product design as that first way of making that transition. But other examples are adoption of renewable energy technology. We know that renewable energy can reduce 55% of global greenhouse gas emissions. There are many householders and businesses in Australia that are adopting rooftop solar as one way of doing that. So, this is an important part of the circular economy. Reduction of raw material and emissions reductions. 50% reduction of raw material consumption is a target that the Netherlands has adopted. Again, full extended producer responsibility in Europe is another way of maintaining and encouraging manufacturing and designers to actually adopt a much more whole system approach to the way that products are actually being put onto market. And research, which the Minister spoke quite a bit about in his presentation. The European Union has significantly invested euros into research across a range of areas, and they're not dissimilar to what we're doing here in Australia with plastics, food waste, construction, these critical raw materials. So it's a very much, as you were saying earlier, Lisa, that it's very much an all-of-system approach. It's not one single item, which Brooke highlighted, but it is about all of us collectively being aware and making different decisions about how we can actually engage with consumption in our economy.
Thank you, Nicole. That's great. Over to Kate, Department of Agriculture, Water and Environment. Kate, what are your sort of reflections on where we start? We understand you have a couple of programs which we're going to talk about shortly, but just from your perspective as an introduction.
Well, where to begin? It's been so fascinating listening to all the other speakers, and of course they've covered a whole lot of turf that I was going to speak to. But I guess the things that stand out to me are that it is a whole of pipeline issue. My particular focus is sort of on that end of pipe and the kind of recycling and that part of the system. But this is actually a real thinking change, I think, culturally for governments and the community in terms of moving away from that linear thinking and having that mindset shift into designing in circularity and not seeing a product as an end-to-end, but as a circle. I think there is a lot of quite a mindset shift there. The great news, as Nicole touched on, is I think, we really have started, and there are lots of ways in which circularity kind of is becoming part of our normality, even if we don't necessarily, or the public don't necessarily conceptualize or phrase it that way. I think there is a lot of consumer interest in starting to do things differently. The things that sort of stand out to me are the importance of collaboration in this space, and I think that just can't be underestimated. So from the Commonwealth perspective, the fact that we are working really collectively with other governments and with industry bodies under the National Waste Policy Action Plan to bring about a whole lot of things in terms of reducing consumption, thinking more about the way that we do procurement and some of those things, looking at waste exports and banning waste being sent offshore for inappropriate destruction in other countries. I think that's a huge factor from a government perspective, and for me, even just being involved in a panel like this and being able to sit and hear from experts in industry is just hugely instructive and a really critical part of the journey for us. Another point, I suppose, that resonates with me particularly is the consumer thinking. So in two fronts. Firstly, as Nicole pointed out, as the Commonwealth Government, we are quite a substantial consumer, and we are making a lot of inroads into thinking about how we do procurement. So sustainability is now incorporated into our Commonwealth procurement rules, so that when you're assessing value for money, and this is part of that mindset shift, you're not looking at, well, what's the cheapest dollar value on the day? You do actually have to think about the sustainability of products over time, and that the value for money assessment is less simple than it might appear, and that you do need to be feeding in these thinking about, do I need this? Is it going to be used multiple times? What happens at end of life? What actually are those sustainability components of this procurement? So from in terms of making sure we've got our own house in order, that's obviously critically important. I think the other thing from a Commonwealth Government perspective is that obviously we have quite a big platform to be able to communicate with the public and with broader consumers in the sense of household consumers. So my area is we're the policy lead on the Remade in Australia campaign that some might have seen out in the market with TV ads and posters and social media feed and such. And for us, I think that's sort of part of our investment in trying to change the narrative and change the way that the public are thinking. So our looking at what was needed in terms of public messaging, our sense was that the public are very invested in recycling, really think that they're doing the right thing, but that there was a bit of a lack of confidence about, well, what happens next? Actually, does my, am I actually feeding into something bigger, or am I kind of doing the right thing, but there's actually no bigger, broader support, or am I part of a bigger system or not? And so by trying to highlight, look, actually, these things can be recycled like for like, bottle into bottle, but also into all sorts of new and innovative things, be that big infrastructure projects like roads or, small things like sunglasses. That's sort of about us trying to shift the dial on that public discussion a little bit and make sure that people actually are thinking a little differently about the way that they use products.
Terrific. Well, look, we've got another sort of 10 minutes, a little over 10 minutes, 15 minutes. So, Kate, I might keep you talking now about Remade, if I can.
Sure.
Jump ahead, and if you can talk to us about that behavioural change. And you've talked a little bit about policy and what government's doing in policy, but what about behavioural change?
Yeah, sure. So I guess the takeaway from the campaign was that people, by and large, felt that they were doing the right thing by recycling, but that perhaps weren't necessarily going the extra step because they didn't necessarily see that they were being met halfway by government or by industry, or, that they were part of something bigger. So the shift that we are trying to bring about with Remade, and that we are sort of seeing some indications as it happening, is that people do have that sense of renewed confidence that in fact there is a huge investment in doing the right thing with recycling. People are sort of starting to become more aware of what can happen and that they are part of a bigger system. So I guess what we're trying to drive there is people taking the extra steps to take their bags back to the supermarket as opposed to just looking at curbside. A big thing that we identified is that the waste stream can be quite muddied, and I think Suzanne touched on this as well, that when you that there's a bit of sort of wish cycling of people thinking, I'm not really sure if this is recyclable or not, I'll just chuck it in the recycling bin, I'm sure someone will sort it out, and of course you're contaminating the waste stream. And so I think we're trying to just harness that really genuine goodwill and the really strong sense from the public that they do want to be doing the right thing, and just trying to sort of guide that into behaviour change at curbside. But also, I suppose the other thing is about consumer behaviour from the other end of saying, when you are in the shop, when you're looking at something, it is important to think, A, is this recyclable? You know, look for the ARL, look for things that show you what you can do with it. Use the products that are at your disposal, like Recyclemate, to figure out how to recycle things properly and do it. But also look for things that have got recycled content, you know, prioritise that. Change the value proposition for manufacturers to show that this is actually something that that there's a strong consumer drive for, and that sort of starts to change behaviours all the way along that chain in terms of then, you know, creating a great industry for recycled content in products. And so that, you know, becomes its own little circle of kind of driving consumer change and in turn sort of driving manufacturing change.
Thank you, Kate. That's terrific. What I'm going to do now is combine our last two questions into one for each of the rest of the panelists. So one of the things we did want to talk about today and share with everyone is just what's the most challenging part of, or challenging thing about the circular economy transition for your organisation or your members, and what sort of keeps you awake at night. So I want you to answer this question. And the second one is, we've got a big audience here across lots of sectors. They've got vested interest in this. How can they help over the next 18 months? So those two pieces, and if we can start with you, Suzanne, and then we'll work through the panel.
Thanks, Lisa. And so I'm just going to focus on recycling as a critical part of the circular economy, noting that it's a part. One of the things I've found actually both challenging and seriously surprising as a relative newcomer to the sector is the misalignment between our regulatory frameworks and our desire and very broad commitment to circular outcomes. So I'd say, you know, the concept of wish cycling is something that we apply to, you know, people maybe putting things in the wrong place, I would say, the non-recyclable items at curbside. At the same time, I think we wish cycle at a policy level too. We have the idea that we can set up these structures, we can set up financing and investment for recycling to occur. However, at a state level, we have some very serious impediments to being able to recycle. Our environmental policies really impede our ability to recover as many resources as possible effectively, and not just that, but to innovate in, when it comes to recovered materials. So I'd say a big challenge is recalibrating our regulatory frameworks so that we can engage in the most in maximising resource recovery and delivering back into the market what everybody, I'd say, expects is being delivered in the first place. On top of that, and as several panellists had mentioned, procurement, making sure that that every lever is pulled to procure that material as well. So Standards is doing a great job in helping to better align standards and specs so that that procurement can occur. Government needs to do a much better job in making, as I said before, the recycled rubber hit the road and ensuring that we're delivering recycled material in every way that we can back into the economy as we seek to improve the value of those recycling outcomes, and making sure also that we have good responsibility taken at all levels for the products that are being delivered, for those making them, for those buying them, for those disposing of them, and for those repairing and remaking them. So yep, there's something for all of us to do, but I'd like to see a better aligned regulatory framework.
Okay, thanks, Susanna. Excellent. Can we go to you, Brooke, now? So the reflections are, what's most challenging and how can people engage in the next 18 months?
I think some of the most challenging things are really that collaboration. We are very much at the point now of this isn't, you know, we're talking about the concept of a circular economy. It's embedded at a state, territory and federal government level in policy frameworks. There is 1,000,001 different task force and organisations working on this. This is our new way of being. And the real challenge here is that implementation phase. It's always, even at an organisational level, it's incredibly challenging to take a strategy and convert it into an implementation and what that is for my job and your job and everybody else's. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges that we have, is this transition period, and it will be bumpy, and it will be managing the expectations of an entire supply chain and communities around how fast something can happen, how quickly you can move that ship, what will it be, you know, there's issues around data currency and issues around consistency, and, you know, to Suzanne's point around, you know, consistency in terms of regulation and policy, and, you know, from state to state. And, you know, that misalignment creates some really significant barriers. And so there is a lot to do to try and harmonize. It's not a word that everyone likes, but, you know, it's something that's really necessary if you want to effectively deliver on the circular economy. And I think there's also this level of behaviour change. People forget, and Kate was touching on consumers and talking about the Remade program. What we forget is we're talking about behaviour change. Behaviour change is not a 5-minute commitment. It's a 20, 30, 40-year commitment to getting people to think fundamentally different to how they do today. And, you know, you've got to empower and hold people's attention and engage them through that entire period. That is an incredible challenge. So I think there's a lot to be done. And, you know, many things keep me awake at night, Lisa, when I think about it in detail. But I also think the opportunity is incredible. And I think what is fabulous is, for us and the work that we're doing right now, we're past the why should you do it and what does it mean, and we're very much at the let's get it done, big system changes, implementation of the circular economy. It takes a lot of effort, but there is lots of ways in which people can engage in that. We've just had the NEPM review that came out at the end of last year that looked at the current structure. That gives us a real opportunity over the next couple of years to really think about, from a circular economy packaging perspective, do we have the right framework? What can we do to make that more robust? And what does our future look like? So we need to keep talking, we need to keep working together, and we need to strive to overcome many of those things that keep, I'm sure, most of the panelists awake at night.
Thank you, Brooke, and thanks for sharing that. Nicole, just a couple of minutes and then we'll end on Connie, if that's possible.
Yeah, sure. Look, I think the biggest challenge, as Brooke was saying, that we've got this very large task of behaviour change. You know, what we've been doing, we've got this habit of how we've been existing for the last 250 years of creating new products continuously to put out to a market that's continuously buying. So that, you know, business as usual extraction model, we know that's not sustainable. So being able to make those shifts in behaviours is a really important element. But for businesses particularly, and also governments, also as Brooke raised, the issue of data is something that's really quite critical. For us, what we'll be doing over the next 18 months through our metrics working group at the ACE Hub is to look at what indicators we have and which ones are necessary to be able to provide that data, that evidence base, to make decisions around policy of what's needed for the circular economy. Similarly, we have a procurement working group, and those members will be working hard to support a circular procurement initiative over the next 18 months. And look, we're going to be working with a range of stakeholders on education. Education is another big challenge, not only just general awareness, but how are we going to educate the next generation of folks who will be actually participating and making the circular economy work. So that's another really important part that we'll be doing. We've also got our first ACE Hub conference that's happening in November, which people can definitely get involved with. So more on that to come. So keep an eye on the ACE Hub website.
Thanks, Nicole. Terrific. And yeah, really important piece there around education. Connie, just final points, what sort of keeping you or concerning you, barriers keeping you awake at night, and then how can people engage in coming 18 months?
Sure, thanks, Lisa. I'd echo all the other panelists as well. There's so much happening. There's a plethora of wicked problems and opportunities. So at Standards, we rely on our technical experts to volunteer their knowledge and time to develop standards, and resourcing this type of expertise can be a big challenge, as well as reviewing our existing catalogue of 10,000 standards to ensure that it's fit for purpose for the circular economy transition. So culturally, I think embracing that circular thinking and embedding this in future standards development. Organisationally, our strategic initiatives team was set up to explore opportunities that cut across the different sectors, as opposed to the traditional vertical standards in particular sectors. So this is a challenge to overcome as well. And then just process-wise, how do we develop guidance quicker but with quality? What can we do faster? How can we work smarter? And how can we best work with our key partners, like the key organisations today on the panel, to amplify that impact and avoid duplication? In terms of involvement of others, we are always looking for knowledge experts to join our technical committees to contribute to the development of standards. So put your hand up if you're interested. Also, you can submit a proposal for a new standard if you see there's a need for that, and commenting on draft standards as well. So that's how you can all become involved. But I think, yeah, together we can make the future circular. Thanks.
Thanks, Connie, and thanks for making the very technical work of standards very accessible to everybody. Can everybody join me in thanking Suzanne, Brooke, Connie, Kate and Nicole, and for your perspectives? It was excellent. I want to say to everyone, thanks for your questions coming in. We're just running out of time at the moment, so we will answer them. Make sure you put them in the Q&A box rather than the chat box so we don't lose them.